In this video, I want to take a couple minutes to look at a couple different ways to work with tuples and collections. So let's see here. First of all, the book talks about the in operator, and it's kind of handy. You can search through a collection of values, a sequence, and if you find a matching value, you get a true or false back, a Boolean value back. So let's say I have a couple of tuples here, and I go through and ask the question, is it true that Bob Smith is found in row 2? Well, in that case, the answer would be no. But if I change it over to row 1, the answer will be true. Customer is found. So very simple, but very handy. And this works with loops and works with tuples and lists and other sequence items. We've talked about adding on to a tuple, and I just want to remind everybody that when you're working with tuples and you want to add them on, you can use the plus equal sign to add on a value. However, like this. However, if you do, you got to have that comma at the end. This one has caused so many people so many problems that I'm telling you twice just to make sure it gets through. A lot of people have come in like after the weekend when I'm teaching a live class, and they talk about the story of how many hours they spent trying to make the homework assignment work, and it just wouldn't because of this. So that's it bears repeating. Remember that if you leave that off and you try to do something like this, you'll get an error message. It'll say something about you can only concatenate a tuple, not a string, to a tuple. And so you want to be careful of that. Chapter 5 will talk about lists, and lists are very similar to tuples. So the thing with lists are they're much more flexible. They also have additional functions that make working with lists a little bit easier, in fact quite a bit easier in a lot of ways. We're going to look at it in more detail, but basically the way it works is if you use square brackets instead of parentheses, you end up with a list. And with a list, you don't have to worry about adding a comma at the end. When you're doing your homework, if you choose to use a tuple or a list, I really won't care. Lists are a little bit easier to work with. We're going to look at them in more detail coming up. But let me just give you an example here. To convert this over to a list, I just put square brackets, quite simply. I should rename this, but Python doesn't care what I call it. So if I want to rename that, refactor rename, I will call it LST for list. A refactor is kind of handy, lets you go through and rename things automatically. This is only used in one spot, so I don't need to do that. And that's it. So that's how simple it will be to convert over to a list, and then you won't have to worry about adding things together. So for example, excuse me, if I want to take row 1 and add row 2 to it, I'm not sure why I would, but let's say I did, and then ask the question, is it true that Sue Jones, or just Sue for that matter, is found in there? Let's see what comes out. Customer not found. Let's try Jones. Customer found. Yahoo! That's because now the lists have been combined into one long list. Again, we'll look at lists more in Module 5, but hopefully if you're struggling getting assignments done in this module, and people do sometimes, hopefully that will help. We're going to try a little lab out here using the in operator, and in that I'll give you kind of an example of how you might use a list versus a tuple, and I'll see you there.